Assalamualaikum and good morning. Welcome to Main News. I'm Iman Kamila binti Imran along with my co-anchor
Marina Muhammad Hanifah.
These are top stories for today. Inflation that hit United States and unemployment in the US. About 333.996 million is the population of the United States. However, according to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the inflation rate is still in manageable range for 2014 and 2015. But it fluctuates from year to year. The inflation rate rose up to 2.2% in 2016 from 0.7% from the prior year and remains the same for the next year. However, in 2021, the country experienced a second severe inflation after 41 years, which was 7.4%. In 1890, the inflation rate was recorded at 11.9%. It was the highest rate the country had ever seen. Later on, the country managed to lower its inflation rate to 6.6% in 2022. Next, we move on to the second topic.
Thank you, Iman. Here are the issues that related to inflation in the United States. The American people have a clear view of inflation as the main problem facing the US and nothing else is more pressing. According to a survey of 5,074 US adults conducted by Pew Research in April and May 2022, 70% of respondents rated inflation as a very big problem for the nation, with healthcare affordability and violent crime coming in close behind at about 55% each. The continuing coronavirus pandemic has caused prices to rise at the quickest rate in 4 decades in December 2021, up 7% over the same month last year. This made 2021 the year of high inflation. The Bureau of Labor Statistics said on Wednesday, 12 January 2022, that prices increased by 0.5% in December compared to the previous month. Despite being high, inflation slowed down from the sharp price increases experienced in October and November. As a result of disrupted supply chains and increasing customer demand for second-hand automobiles and building supplies alike, 2021 nonetheless experienced the highest yearly price growth since the early 1980s. Inflation warnings were raised for officials at the Federal Reserve and the White House as higher costs crept into nearly every purchase made by families and companies. Chief economist at the real estate brokerage Redfin Darrell Fairweather said, "We have to take a step back. We had extremely low inflation this time last year. So it is not the end of the world that inflation is 7%. It would be very concerning if next year it was still 7%. But we are going to see some high inflation until the virus is not interrupting supply chains and not causing people to change their spending habit. The pandemic's economic recovery is now most at risk from inflation, which also poses a significant political risk given the Republicans continue to blame stimulus programs for the economy overheating. Both the Biden and Trump administration enacted relief measures. The Federal Reserve is now also subject to a severe policy test. Officials anticipate 3 interest rate hikes this year, but caution is required to control inflation without jeopardizing the rebound of the economy and the robust employment market. In April 2023, the USA annual inflation rate dropped to 4.9%, the lowest level since April 2021. The Consumer Price Index (CPI), a gauge of inflation, is published monthly by the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. The CPI calculates the average change in price over time for a market basket of goods and services purchased by urban consumers. The US Bureau of Labor Statistics report that households with lower and higher income may experience different level of inflation. The CPI for all urban consumers grew by 4.9% over the previous 12 months in April 2023. Over the previous 12 months, the CPI for urban wage earners and office workers climbed by 5%. Over the previous 12 months, the CPI for urban consumer with income below the 25 percentile climbed by 5.3%. Over the previous year, the CPI for urban consumers with earning above the 75 percentile climbed by 4.9%. Joining me live from Federal Reserve Bank of New York, we have our live reporter Nurin Batrisya Nasir reporting about the causes of inflation in the US.
Thank you, Marina, live from the studio. Over the previous 2 years, Americans and citizens globally have seen inflation rates skyrocket. Inflation has reached a 40-year high in the last year. But what causes such high inflation? Is there any likelihood of inflation rates falling? Increase in interest rates is one of the main causes of inflation in the US. To combat inflation, the Federal Reserve has steadily increased interest rates since 2022. Federal Chairman Jerome Powell said at the time, inflation data received over the past 3 months show a welcome reduction in the monthly pace of increases. And while recent developments are encouraging, we will need substantially more evidence to be confident that inflation is on a sustained downward path. The idea behind this strategy is that raising interest rates will reduce borrowing and disrupt spending power, hence reducing inflation. However, this would only occur if inflation was caused by an excess of purchasing power. Price gouging and profit price inflation are the main causes of price increases in the US. Companies are raising their pricing on the excuse of rising labor, energy, and material expenses. The COVID-19 pandemic is also one of the causes of inflation in the US. The epidemic resulted in a standard case of demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation can be generated by a variety of sources. However, in this case, it is mostly induced by household expenditure. For example, when lockdowns were lifted and individuals felt more at ease returning to their regular lives as the virus started to fade. People started making purchases once more, but the poor supply chain was unable to keep up with the speed of the purchases. And shortages and price rises happen when demand far exceeds the supply. Now let's move to the White House for our reporter Nur Afika Jamshid to report on policies for inflation in the US. I'm Nurin Batrisya Nasir reporting live.
Thank you, Nurin. It is decided that monetary policy is the best solution to the inflation issues in the United States. In simple words, monetary policy is regulating the money supply in a country's economy to stabilize the level of inflation and output. One of the procedures is by raising interest rates. A central bank's usual response is to increase official interest rates. This is an illustration of a policy that promotes contraction or deflation. High interest rates that will decrease the aggregate demand will lead to lower demand, pull inflation, and a slow rate of economic growth. For instance, if interest rates rise, it will make it more expensive to pay off mortgages on real estate. This would slow down the rate at which house prices rise, which will result in less demand for housing. Credit unions, savings and loan associations, and commercial banks are all subject to the reserve requirement. Reserve requirements represent the quota of liquid assets that a bank needs to hold, and they are expected to shield the foundation from runs on deposits. Meanwhile, loan and other investment losses are covered by capital requirements. In addition to giving a barrier against bank and liquid assets, reserve requirement is also utilized as a financial device by the Federal Reserve. It also means that the Federal Reserve is removing finance from the money supply and expanding the expense of credit when reserve requirements are raised. The Federal Reserve is pursuing a contractionary monetary policy if the country has a higher reserve requirement. When banks have a higher reserve requirement, they cannot lend money to people as the money for loan is limited. Next, we have open market operations. Open market operations are significant as it is used to guide the economy in the country and aim to alter the reserve balances of the banks and bring about impulsive changes in the current interest rates. that typically has a far-reaching influence of expanded inflationary strain, surge in employment and economic growth, and far more prominent financial success for companies and people. As a lender of last resort, the Federal Reserve's main objective is to guarantee the stability of banks and the money system. To forestall unjustifiable bank disappointments, only selected banks are permitted to get what they require at exceptionally short developments from the Federal Reserve's discount rate. And it is in this way alluded to as a standing loaning office. Reporting live from Washington, D.C., United States, I'm Nurafika.
Thank you, Nurin and Fika, for the live reports. Our second and last topic is unemployment in the US. The IMF data mapper indicated that in 2008, the employment rate started to get high from 4.6% to 5.8%. It continued to rise for 3 consecutive years. This was a result of the financial crisis called the Great Recession that occurred at the end of 2007 until 2009. After 2010, the unemployment rate declined for 9 years in a row, from 2011 until 2019. From 9.6% to 3.7%, the country was in a recovery stage. In 2020, the country's unemployment rate was up to 8.1% from 3.7% in 2019. This is due to the declaration of the COVID-19 pandemic that impacted and affected worldwide. The US was able to lower the rate of unemployment after they were hit by the COVID-19 pandemic in a short period of time. In 2022, the unemployment rate was 3.6%, which was equal to 5.7 million people that are unemployed. It was the lowest unemployment rate the country had ever recorded.
By March 26, there were 3.3 million initial unemployment claims, up from 281,000 at the beginning of the month. When Biden started office, there were 10 million unemployed individuals and an unemployment rate of 6.4% in January 2021. The American Rescue Plan, which was approved in March, was the first relief initiative authorized under Biden. The rate of unemployment decreased to 3.9% at the end of the year, as a majority of businesses had been able to resume business with no interference from the federal government. While the unemployment rate was just about 4% earlier in 2022, billions of dollars in payment to Americans and their return to work have boosted consumers' prices for things like cars, groceries, and utilities. All states have lifted restrictions on COVID-19, but some cities have re-extended restrictions due to rising cases, making vaccine and boosters available to all ages 5 and older. No further aid was sent, but Biden further extended his moratorium on student loan payment. The unemployment rate was just 3.6% in March 2022, the closest to pre-pandemic levels in 2 years. Unemployment and employment data are declining as the top economic traits as record inflation takes hold in the US.
Thank you, Marina. I am back again at the Federal Reserve Bank in NYC to report on the types of unemployment in the US. As we all know, there are 3 common types of unemployment in the US, which are cyclical, structural, and frictional unemployment. Structural unemployment occurs when there is a mismatch between the abilities of employers and workers, while cyclical unemployment is brought on by shift in economic activity during the business cycle. And for frictional unemployment, it happens when people who have lost their job begins the process of looking for new employment, which can take some time for them to identify new employment prospects, apply for them, go through the interview process, and be hired. The question is, what type of unemployment does the US experiencing currently? The COVID-19 epidemic caused the structural and cyclical unemployment rates in the US economy to alter in ways that had never been seen before. When the epidemic first began, the unemployment rate in the US more than quadrupled, peaking at 14% in April 2020. It's essential to remember that a large portion of these job losses were temporary. Additionally, as a result of COVID-19, a large number of people left the workforce willingly. Jerome Powell noted that even while the overall unemployment rate was 3.5% as of the end of 2022, this figure might be underestimated because of people who are not actively looking for work. Jerome Powell noted that even while the overall unemployment rate was 3.5% as of the end of 2020, this figure might be underestimated because of people who are not actively looking for work. Now, let's move to the White House for our reporter Nur Afika Jamshid to report on policies for unemployment in the US.
Thank you, Noreen. After identifying the unemployment problems that the United States has, it has come to the conclusion that fiscal policy suits best for this issue. Fiscal policy alludes to the utilization of government spending and tax policies to impact monetary circumstances, particularly macroeconomic circumstances. Taxes are mandatory and compulsory payments collected from individuals and companies by a government body to fund government functions. Taxes impact the economy by deciding the amount of cash the government possesses to spend in specific regions and how much cash people ought to spend. Decreasing the taxes will expand the consumption of every individual. For example, the government reduces income tax. When the rate of taxes that needs to be paid is lower, laborers only need to pay a small amount of taxes. Therefore, they will still receive a large amount of money from their income after deducting taxes. The increasing demands of goods and services will prompt more investments, hence employment will increase from this. Furthermore, government spending is utilized as a device for fiscal policy to run the government cash to sectors that require a financial lift. When government spending happens, it can stimulate the economy because of the money spent on goods and services. As an example, when the government constructs a scaffold or a highway, the organizations and laborers who complete the work will provide an income. In return, these people will spend their finance on goods and services, and this will increase the aggregate demand and consumption. Having a surge in aggregate demand and consumption will surely increase the demand for employment. Thus, the unemployment issue will reduce because of the government's demand. Reporting live from Washington, D.C., United States, I'm Nur Afika.
That's all from Main News. I'm Iman Kamila Imran.
I'm Marina Mama Hanifa. Thank you and Assalamualaikum.